Well, that's my dedicated right time.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. Okay, I'll declare this meeting open at 6:04. The town of Bassendean acknowledges the past and present traditional owners of the land on which we gather to conduct this meeting and pays its respects to their elders both past and present. We have an apology from Councillor Ames. I do not believe there are any others with an apology. We'll deal with leave of absences next week at the OCM. Councillors, do I have any declarations of interest on any item on the agenda? No? So we'll move on. I have no announcements. Statements, questions and deputations by members of the public. We have no questions that have been sent in and no deputations. There was one statement from a resident. It is very lengthy. It's from Kelly O'Brien of 41 Cyril Street, Bassendean. It refers to the closing time period over Christmas, New Year's for the council, expressing an objection to the period of time that the council will be closed, the offices that is, because there is skeleton crews that work over Christmas and New Year's providing essential services to our community. So I understand that this will appear, this response from the community member will appear in its entirety in the minutes of the meeting. Is that correct, Mr. CEO?
Correct, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So with that, I won't read it out because it is a very lengthy email, and I do understand that all councillors received that email a week ago. Okay. With that, councillors, we will move on to the items. So the first item that we've got is the end of year closure. I'll ask Manager of Governance and Strategy if you would, CEO, if you'd like to speak to this item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors. The item is guided by an administrative policy. It's very similar to previous years' closures. One of the reasons that we have got this policy obviously is to enable our staff to enjoy Christmas with their families and get a well-earned rest. But the other reason is that it also assists us with our leave liability issues. Our current EBA allows staff to accumulate up to 8 weeks annual leave before any need to have a discussion around managing leave. And this is a great way for the town to manage part of its leave liability. And there are also 2 public service days that the public sector workers get, and the preference is for those days to be spent between Christmas and New Year rather than staff electing to work and then take those at an additional time during the year when we may be much busier. As you know, we finish from a governance point of view about mid-December with our last council report, and therefore to use that time when the business is much quieter to alleviate some of our leave liability and to give staff a well-earned rest is the policy we've been using, and I think it works very well. But I also understand the concerns of some of the ratepayers. But having said that, we do have a skeleton crew that manage all of our emerging issues as they arise, whether that with waste. We use Veolia Waste Services to answer waste inquiries. We have rangers operating on skeleton staff, and we have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week backup service at the moment with Bayswater should there be urgent items. So the fact that some of our services aren't open doesn't mean to say that essential services cannot be delivered. Happy to take any questions.
Councillors, do we have any questions on this item? Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I just request that all this is up on our website and we can let anyone who asks us know that all the information is readily available from the website? Good, thank you.
Take that on board, thank you.
So I'd also add that there's usually social media for all our ratepayers, and there's additional waste collection services over Christmas and New Year's as usual, which is also normally promoted a month in advance of the Christmas New Year break. So, councillors, the next Councillor Plivka.
Yeah, just in terms of services over the festive period, will we be doing the regular bin twice as often over that period again?
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, so the regular bin, that'll be collected twice during the festive
Okay, so all 3 bins are collected for a 2-week period between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah, so that'll continue.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, unless there's been any change, but my understanding is that for the upcoming Christmas New Year period, all 3 bins, as has occurred for the last 4 years that I know of, are collected each day for 2 weeks.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, the next item is 12.3, the Bassendean Local Emergency Management Committee meeting held on the 12th of June. Again, I'd ask the officer if there's any commentary that you'd like to add to this item.
Through you, Madam Mayor. It was a very positive meeting with a very big attendance. I don't think I've got anything to add really. The 2 significant items were just acknowledging that the duties of local recovery coordinator returned to the Director of Community Place, and secondly that we'll be having a joint recovery training session on the 3rd of December, which will be conducted jointly by Bayswater and Bassendean. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Plivka?
Yeah, just in terms of the minutes that we're receiving there, is it intended that the recommendation of that committee to investigate the evacuation centres is something which would be explored, noting that the senior high school will be discontinued as a site?
Okay, Councillor Plivka, you'll have to move closer to your microphone because I actually only heard half of that myself.
Okay. It's sounding very loud to me, but maybe not to everyone else. So tell me if I'm shouting. The question was that when it came to that committee, the recommendation there regarding a review of the evacuation centres, because there was comment that Cyril Jackson Senior High School was no longer suitable for that purpose and would be discontinued for that purpose. So would we be acting on that recommendation and investigating the adequacy of our evacuation centres?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes. The conversation at the meeting was that they were looking to ensure that it was Town of Bassendean sites and that were fit for purpose. So, for example, sites that included toilets that were inside, for example, and it was the recommendation from the meeting that Cyril Jackson didn't meet those requirements.
So will an alternative site be found, or?
The only site will be here, the Town of Bassendean Senior Citizens and Community Centre. That's my understanding.
Okay.
And as the Department of Communities officer is doing an inspection of that site with the welfare coordinator of the town, which is the manager of community development, to determine that. And I imagine we'll bring it back to the August committee meeting to get that ratified.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Plivka?
Is there a particular standard we need to meet? I mean, do we need to ensure that every resident's a certain distance from the evacuation centre? Do we have to have regard to, I suppose, the railway dividing our local government in half and having evacuation centres sort of either side of geographical features? Is that something, is there a standard we need to adhere to?
Through the chair, I think I'll probably have to take that one on notice.
Okay,
I'll
thanks.
check with the Department of Communities.
Thank you. So, councillors, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to 12.4, Draft Amended Local Planning Policy number 13, Tree Retention and Provision. And Mr. Snedden will provide a bit of an overview on this one. Thank you.
worries. Thanks, guys. So the purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting an amended local planning policy number 13, tree retention and provision for the purposes of public consultation. The amended policy aligns with the intent of the amended local planning policy that Council adopted in February, but later rescinded in March for the reasons outlined within the report. The policy aligns with the Wauga model tree retention policy, and if adopted would identify tree damaging activities as works or development that requires approval in some circumstances. If a person fails to obtain development approval when required, it would therefore become an offence under the Planning and Development Act 2005. Whilst it is acknowledged that if the policy is ultimately adopted, it would be difficult to prove for the purposes of a prosecution that the former tree met the criteria to be required to obtain approval from the town. Pursuing the policy aligns with the town's commitment to environmental sustainability and increasing its tree canopy coverage. Acknowledging the implications of the policy, the town does recommend a longer advertising period than stipulated in the regulations, which is 21 days. In this instance, we've recommended 30, just to give a greater opportunity for the community to view the policy and provide their comment on it. And through that process, we'll also be developing a series of fact sheets that will be distributed and provided with the advertising material.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillors, are there questions on this? I actually can't see it now. Correct me if I'm wrong. We go out to advertising. Does this actually need approval from WAPC?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, there are provisions within the policy which are being carried forward, which do vary or augment the deemed to comply requirements in relation to provision of trees that would need the WAPC consent. So under the Volume 1 of the Planning Codes, Part B and C, we are seeking to vary the deemed to comply requirements or augment them, which would therefore require the WAPC consent. There's no guarantees that that will be supported, given that the planning codes were only recently released in April of this year. But from the town's perspective, we do think, in terms of the assessment criteria that the WAPC were required to justify the policy against, that there is merit in terms of specific need. We do have a relatively low canopy cover in the district, and it still aligns with the objectives of the R codes and the ability from an auditing perspective is standard compliance. So it'd be similar to the argument that we previously put forward to the Commission to seek to vary or augment the deemed to comply requirements to a higher standard and an increased canopy coverage requirement for development.
Thank you for that. So, out of interest, I note that there are other local governments that are like us bringing in tree protection policies. Does our policy differ significantly from some of those others? And are they all submitting to WAPC? I guess I'm seeking some understanding of how it's operating across the sector.
So in relation to the more recent adoption of tree retention policies, which are following the Wauga guidelines, as far as I'm aware, there's only 2 at the moment. We would be the 3rd, and I believe there are a few other local governments looking to include this in the June OCM. Ours does differ to the South Perth and Netherlands examples in that we are carrying forward existing provisions from our policy relating to the provision of trees, and there's based on the Wauga policy only, and they haven't gone down the path of trying to develop or have a higher standard for residential development. If the Commission doesn't support those aspects of the policy, it wouldn't mean that the policy would be at fault and the remainder of the policy would be eligible to remain. It would just be those provisions that relate to the variation of the deemed to comply requirements of the R codes.
Okay, so that would bring it back to what is the basic Wauga policy.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you for that. Councillors, further questions? Councillor Polifka.
Yes, thank you. In terms of the projections for the canopy cover for each of the lots under these provisions, under the Wauga model and the projections that you've done, what sort of percentage of canopy cover would we expect for a lot under this regime?
If you're referring to the deemed to comply requirements under the R codes, yes. Yep. So we did a little bit of background work on group dwelling developments and single houses that have been lodged with the town over the last 6 months. We did probably 10 examples in terms of if it met the deemed to comply requirements of the current R codes as they are. It's about 3 to 5% in terms of canopy coverage. If you go via the augmented version under the local planning policy, which stipulates larger minimum tree requirements and larger deep soil areas, it increases to about just over 10%.
And that's what's being advocated here, the policy which would allow 10% coverage on the privately owned lots.
That's correct, as a deemed to comply standard.
And in terms of a projection, because I note there that we're trying to get to a total 30% canopy cover, do we know that through a combination of private land at 10% and publicly held land at whatever amount that we might plant it out to, are we able to ever reach that target? Or do we need to do more in terms of what we require on private land?
So residential or our zoned land equates to about 70% of the district. Our road reserves just about 20%, and then public open space and parks is 15. So zoned land's about 65 as a 100% makeup. So if you're getting 10% or 65% of the land, it may be difficult to achieve the 30% canopy cover. But that canopy cover, as I understand it, is a movable canopy target, and as we obtain further information and the like, we can look to revise that canopy target. If need be, I think the Executive Manager of Environment might be able to provide further input on that, though.
Through the Chair, the Tree Canopy Action Plan does have the target of 30% by 2040, but there's also an action in there to undertake further modelling, looking at each land use zone to confirm whether that's a viable target or if different targets need to be set for different land use types. So we'll be reviewing that when the updated urban monitor data is available later this year.
And just to understand how that process will work, is the modelling to change policies to ensure we get to 30%, or to say we look at our policies and say, where are we actually going to get? Do we give up on 30% and say 25%? I mean, which way is it driven? Is it the horse or the cart?
Through the Chair, we would identify projected activities on lands that we control. So, for example, public open space and streetscapes. And the control we have over private land is limited, such as through the policies. So it would be based on a combination of the two.
So any help we could get from the state government would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Okay. Can I just ask one last question? The advertising for this is going to be for 30 days. Would it be possible to ensure that there is promotion of this on the town's website and social media? I'd be interested to know if we could actually promote this to get as much feedback as possible.
Through the Chair, our standard approach is to put our local planning policies on our website and through our social media, and we'll be looking to do that for this one as well.
Thank you very much. Okay. So, councillors, unless there's further questions, we'll move on to 12.5, which is Audit and Governance Committee meeting held on the 12th of June. And Mr. White, I believe this is yours.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and evening councillors. So yes, we held the last meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on the 12th of June. There were a few items on the agenda. The first was the Audit Planning Memorandum that councillors might remember was circulated previously, those councillors on the committee, was circulated previously out of session when it was available and received from the auditors and tabled formally at the meeting of the committee. And the purpose of it really is to explain how the auditors are going to undertake the annual audit, which they're currently in the process of at the moment. But the important thing, I guess, from a councillor perspective is to note that at the December meeting, the committee, the audit report and the recommendations will come back along with officer comments in terms of how any findings are proposed to be addressed. We also tabled a new Audit and Governance Committee charter, a proposed charter for the committee to replace the current
instrument of appointment and delegation. And the reason for doing that really was because the current sort of instrument is fairly dated, and it is based on a Department of Local Government Sport and Cultural Industries model, whereas since that time the Auditor General has released a guide that is broadly applicable to state and local government entities, and we have adapted that for what we think is tailoring it to the purposes and the requirements of the town. And so we're proposing the recommendation to the committee was that he'd recommend that council adopt the new charter. We also tabled a revised record keeping policy. There weren't any significant changes to the policy. It was more just to update it. It was due for review. So we reviewed it and updated and brought into some more contemporary terminology. But it does contain some record keeping requirements in relation to councillors, and there's a succinct sort of table in the policy that summarises councillors' obligations in terms of identifying when a record needs to be created and copying that into or forwarding it to mail at Bassendean. There was a purchasing policy review, and the final matter was the audit findings log, which was is a confidential attachment. It's tabled at every meeting of the committee, and it provides an update on administration's actions in relation to the various outstanding audit recommendations. So just to come back to the main item, I suppose, aside from the charter being the purchasing policy review, the policy was reviewed this time last year, and some changes were made to the policy, and we were bringing it back to the audit committee after, I guess, having the benefit of the first 12 months of operation of that policy, because we felt that there was one aspect of it that perhaps was causing some operational difficulties and inefficiencies, particularly with a lot of the routine ongoing operational type works that need to happen in our infrastructure area. And that was the low threshold of $1,000 over which two written quotes were required. And the experience as a result of the first 12 months of that has really led us to the conclusion that we maybe haven't quite got the balance right between managing the procurement risk and facilitating operational effectiveness and efficiency, and that threshold is a little low. So the key reason for bringing the policy back to council through the committee was to recommend an increase up to $5,000 for staff to be able to direct purchase goods or services from a supplier. I guess I just wanted to make 2 points in relation to that very quickly. The first is that there still is an overriding responsibility on all officers who procure goods and services on the part of the town to ensure value for money. So we would expect people to have knowledge of the local environment and marketplace in the areas of their expertise, and if the quote that they have obtained doesn't represent value for money, the expectation is that they will source further quotes as required. And the second point I just wanted to make in relation to that was if council do adopt this tonight, next week, we would propose to develop, and we do this anyway, an internal audit program that we would run in-house to develop a fairly simple process and procedure for sampling and auditing our lower level spend across the town, and we propose to report the results of those audits annually to the committee. Thank you.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Burke?
Hi, sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. Question for Paul.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, yes,
Mr. White.
White. Sorry. That threshold would remain within the budgets set for that financial year. Is that correct?
Yes, through Madam Mayor, that's correct, Councillor Burke. So nothing changes in terms of the individual officers' sort of purchasing delegation our approval thresholds, requirements for purchases to be signed off by a manager with delegated authority, all of those sorts of things, and of course the requirement to actually have a budget in the first place.
Yeah.
So nothing changes. The proposal is designed to, I suppose, eliminate the requirement to run around and trying to get multiple quotes for very, very small purchases in the context of the town's operations. And there are a few examples cited in the report to the audit committee in terms of some of the difficulties that we've had, and quite often suppliers they're just reluctant to provide a quote for a $1,000 or $2,000 purchase, especially if they know that we're seeking multiple quotes. It's just proved to be difficult in a range of circumstances, particularly for infrastructure.
Yeah.
I suppose so. We'd be looking to try and increase that threshold. And again, I guess if it's not working and we don't have the balance right again, we can always report back and come back to council as need arises.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Can I just ask one quick question? You mentioned at the end that your department, town staff, were going to do a little bit of a sample internal audit, and I also know that there is significant workload attached with the auditors and the programs that they commit to in our town, and the workload that's required of your staff to provide the information. Is there an excess workload attached to what you're proposing, or you believe that your staff are capable of achieving what you have in mind?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, I think it's fairly straightforward. It's something that we would prepare a process,
Yeah.
and with an administrative policy to guide how it operates, which we've commenced. And in terms of the actual auditing, we'd be looking to do it on a quarterly basis and to sample an appropriate number across the different thresholds. And currently, our internal auditors are currently performing an audit of our RFQs and our RFTs, so that's above 60. So we'd be focusing below that level, but we believe it can be accommodated by the procurement team.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much, councillors. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next item, which is the RFT for Bassendean Town Centre Precinct Structure Plan. That's item 12.6. And I will ask Mr. White if you'd like to add some comments about this one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, I guess because it's a tender, it comes to the council through a report through corporate services. But Ms. Brennan is the director responsible for the ultimate project and delivery of the precinct structure plan. But in terms of making a recommendation to council to award the tender, this is a standard tender report that comes to council. The process was conducted in accordance with our required procedures, and it was evaluated by the evaluation panel. The confidential evaluation report is attached and makes a recommendation to council to appoint one of the tenderers to prepare our precinct structure plan for us.
Okay. Councillors, are there any questions on this side? Okay. Councillor Plifka.
Yeah, look, nothing to do with any of the participants or that. Just the question was, when are we expecting to have the precinct structure plan?
I might jump in, and I would fully expect Alex or Michelle that could provide some guidance also. It won't be awarded, obviously, there won't be a start date until obviously July at the earliest. The program is, as I understand it, a 2-year program, but there'll be different parts rolled out, so we won't wait 2 years to have anything completed, but there will be completion points along the way. And I think we are fast tracking one of the projects would be to look at the heritage issues in Nurstead Avenue as a priority, so that deliverable will be quicker than some of the other deliverables. But I might ask the manager of planning to provide further information if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr White.
Through the chair, yeah, that's correct. So it's looking at a 2-year timeframe. This precinct structure plan is a series of processes that need to occur, including a draft being prepared, then advertising, and then final sign-off of that draft before going to the commission. But we're looking at or aiming for a 2-year timeline.
That was all I wanted to hear.
If you'd like to ask a question, did you want to ask another question?
That was the answer.
Okay, can I just ask a question? With there is a process once the precinct structure plan is completed and it's submitted to the minister. That also is a timely process, is it not?
Yes, that's correct. There's statutory timeframes that will guide their timeline to make a decision, similar for this scheme and strategy, to provide feedback to the town on it, whether it is approved or not. I don't have that off the top of my head, and I can take that question on notice.
It's not that important. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the work that you'll provide in this. It's something that we've been aspiring to for a very long time. Thank you. Councillors, are there further questions on this item? Okay, we'll move on to item 12.7, accounts paid. Now, councillors, generally the officer cannot provide information immediately, so if you have any questions about the accounts paid, I would request that you put them in writing to Mr White, and he will then provide a response to all of us. So, okay, councillors, if we can move on, if there's no desire to actually delve into this, we'll move on to 12.8, which is the monthly financial report for May 2024. Mr White, you're popular tonight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's that time of year, end of June.
Yes.
Yes, so we're working on the monthly financial report for May at the moment, and that will come to the council meeting next week. The reports for the OCM will be distributed on Thursday.
Okay. Councillors, any questions on this item? Thank you, Mr White. With that, we'll move on to 12.9, adoption of the annual budget. Now, as you'll note in the documents, there will be the report attached to next week's meeting. My understanding is that all the attachments are as presented to councillors 2 weeks ago. Is that correct, Mr White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, in the main, there's no changes to any of the capital or operational projects or fees and charges or any of that other material that you've seen before. You will get the full statutory budget pack, which is the statutory financial statements with all of the notes and about, rates and reserves and all those sorts of supporting things that make up the statutory budget. There may be some minor changes to the statement of financial activity, not the anticipated expected surplus, but as we've been putting the budget pack together over the last few days, there may have been some minor sort of changes between some of the different categories or some reallocations. But I'll make sure that when we bring this to council next week, that I can highlight any of those changes to councillors in introducing the item.
And the other report that will be included in that is obviously the feedback for differential rating as well.
Yes, that's correct, Madam Mayor. We only received the one submission.
Yep.
Which was touched on when we last caught up about the budget. So we've written back to the submitter to acknowledge the submission and refer them to the council report, and we'll provide the submission in full in the report along with officer comments.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr White.
Thank you, Madam.
Councillors, any questions on this? No? Okay. So we'll move on to 12.10, which is the CEO Performance Review 2023-24, noting, of course, that the attachments to this are confidential. However, I do understand, councillors, that you have all previously perused those attachments. If there are questions relating to this that go into confidential discussions. I will have to take this behind closed doors. So councillors, I'd ask you, well, first of all, I'd ask the CEO if he'd like to provide any information on this, but I think it's fairly straightforward.
It is, Madam Mayor. The only comment I'd like to make is that the KPIs as listed in the report are front-facing, so they will be transparent to the community as they should be. This is slightly ahead of the requirement under the regulations where it will become mandatory, but I appreciate council's consideration in setting our KPIs. I think they're extensive, and I think they're on track with where the organisation's at, and I look forward to the public actually being able to see them as front-facing KPIs, and obviously we'll be reporting against those on a quarterly basis, and those reports will also be front-facing to the community so they can see how we're tracking against those KPIs.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillors, are there any questions that you'd like to ask? And if you do wish to go behind closed doors, could you indicate? No? Okay. So, with that, item 13 is motions of which previous notice has been given. There is none. 14 announcements of notices of motion for the next meeting. I have not been advised that there are any of those notices. There's no urgent business. Confidential business we've more or less dealt with publicly. We now come to the closure of the meeting, which is at 6:40 p.m. So thank you. The next ordinary council meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 30th of July 2024, commencing at 6 p.m. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll wait for the recording to be turned off.